And joining us now, former special assistant to President Biden and former director of message planning Megan Hayes, and former Pennsylvania Republican congressman and senior advisor at Our Republican Legacy, Charlie Dent. Charlie, I'll start with you. Is anything we heard from Trump today enough to restart his political momentum? And is that the tone in which he should have been kind of going into this new chapter and phase of the campaign with?
Well, he's just simply trying to bring attention to himself. That's all. I don't know that he was particularly effective today. I mean, he kept talking about crowd size. Kamala Harris isn't that bright. The usual types of things that he ordinarily says. So I don't really think he did himself a whole lot of good today, other than the fact that he put himself out there to take questions and to draw that contrast with Kamala Harris. Will she stand up and take questions like he did for over an hour? But overall, I don't think it's really changing much. I think they're making a mistake going after Tim Walz on his military service, 24 years in the National Guard. Hell, Donald Trump evaded service in Vietnam, and said he was trying to make sure he evaded getting STDs. It was his own words. So I'm not sure it's a particularly effective attack. But bottom line is, at least we're talking about Donald Trump today and not Kamala Harris. So maybe that's a victory for him in some way.
You're right, because, well, to Trump, it's a good thing that we're talking about him. The smart money among political operatives, of course, has been that as long as Trump is quiet, that helps him and it keeps the focus elsewhere. But one of the things that he talked about was in response to an interview that President Biden did, his first since exiting the 2024 race, where he didn't mince words about the stakes of this 2024 election. Watch.
If Trump wins, no, I'm not confident at all. I mean, if Trump loses, I'm not confident at all. He means what he says. We don't take him seriously. He means it. All the stuff about if we lose, there'll be a bloodbath.
Megan, in response to that, we heard Trump say it'll be a peaceful transfer of power, and it was last time. Of course, we all know what happened on January 6th. But is this the role that Biden can best play as a supporter to Harris? Playing the role of the man who wants to hold democracy together.
Yeah, I think that he's been on the forefront of that. That's what he ran on 20. That's what his campaign on 24 was about, as well as democracy and saving democracy. I think that he is just reminding the American people the contrast that they have, that is at the ballot for Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. I think that he's reminding folks that Donald Trump means what he says, and that he does not believe in a peaceful transfer of power. He is already laying the groundwork for a stolen election. He's already saying untruths about, the vice president now. So I think that the vice president or the president can go out there and, back up the vice president now and sing her praises and really remind the American people the contrast of who's running.
So we're watching, Charlie, Trump now get back in the fray, try to redefine the new ticket that he's running against. But you look at the forums in which he's doing it. Yes, he's done a lot of interviews online, on TV, but he's also trying to get back out on the campaign trail. Most of the events that he's done, though, and I'm specifically talking about the one that's coming up in Montana as well as some others, have been in places that he has won and he's done well. At what point does he have to start wading into some of those swingier states and taking the message there, Charlie?
Well, yeah, he tends to go to areas. He was just in Harrisburg the other day. That's a swing area, Dauphin County,
Certainly,
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's true.
He went to Butler County. That's a very red area of Pennsylvania. So he does go into swing states. He tends to go into communities where he can draw a crowd that's favorable to him. Now, I think he has been smart to try at times. He went into the Bronx, for example, to speak to many people of color. I think that is smart to the extent that he tries to talk to swing voters and other communities that have not historically been aligned with the Republicans. I think that's actually quite smart. But the problem for Donald Trump is most of his rhetoric simply doubles down on his MAGA base. He does very little to reach out to, say, the Haley voter or other swing voters who he oftentimes mocks and insults. And so I think that's a challenge for this guy. Like, he's running a fairly disciplined campaign, but he's an undisciplined candidate. And these two things collide all the time, just as they did last week in the interview with the black journalists, where that was a complete fiasco. And they had to invoke the mercy rule. His team pulled him out, where he just is trying to do the right thing by going in and talking to a constituency that's not ordinarily with him. But then he implodes, and you get the result.
That wavering discipline has been the storyline of the Trump campaign for as long as I was on the campaign trail, from 2015 all the way through now. But Charlie brings something up, Megyn, about the role of independents and swing voters. A new CNBC poll shows independents breaking for Harris 40 to 36%. 20% of those remain undecided. But her lead there is 4 points lower than Biden's in our July survey. Is this a matter of voters needing to know her better, or are these the challenges that Harris has more of in a way that Biden maybe didn't with independents?
You know, I think that she's reintroducing herself to the American people. I think that with the addition of Governor Walz, they are out there and they are on the campaign trail. They are in these swing states. This will be decided in 7 states. 10,000 or so voters in each state are going to decide this election. And I just think that they are out there. They are talking about policies. They are doing what they need to do to reintroduce themselves and to get people excited. The momentum is definitely in their favor. They are talking about the future. They are showing people hope and optimism here in a way that the Biden campaign necessarily did not have that momentum. But it's just watching Trump, you know, it's a stark contrast of watching that press conference and then watching the rally from yesterday with the governor and the vice president. It's just a stark difference. And I think that people don't want to look backwards. They do not want to talk about 2020 being stolen or how everyone is, you know, wrong Donald Trump. They want to know how people are going to help them and how they're going to gas prices lower and their milk lower. Like, they are worried about putting their kids in school and getting a good education and how they're going to pay for groceries. And I think that the vice president and the governor are out there making people, you know, see their policies and being positive and forward-leaning.
Sounds like we're going to get to see the contrast, at least, because there had been this will they or won't they posture on whether or not they'll debate. Charlie, Trump said just now he's agreed to 3 debates, but September is still a bit of a ways away. Do you think it benefits him to do this, or is there a risk to getting on the debate stage not once, not twice, but 3 times with Kamala Harris?
Well, there's always a risk getting on the debate stage with Donald Trump. You know, he's erratic and he can say all kinds of crazy things. But I think he understands this is a different race. You know, he didn't need to debate Joe Biden again after the first one. But now this is a different race. Kamala Harris is in. She's surging. She's got momentum. And he needs to tamp that down, slow it down. So I think it's probably smart for him to debate. And it was interesting to watch him today. Where I thought he did well was when he actually tried to talk about policy, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and things like that. He actually does better when he does that. And but he has no discipline, and he keeps going off on the tangents and going off on the governor of Georgia and, you know, Harris isn't smart, all these things, these ad hominem attacks. So the problem for Trump in the debate setting is he's likely to do that. He'll, you know, you just don't know if he's going to go in there and control himself. He did reasonably well against Biden. He was more controlled in that environment, but we've seen him in other circumstances where he's just out of control and you just don't know what's going to come out of his mouth.
Lots to look forward to. Megyn Hayes and Charlie Dent, thank you for joining.